Okay, good evening, Shalom Aleichem, welcome, hello all. Thank you for inviting me back to speak this evening. So I understand this is the third part of a series of Malchus, Zichronos and Shofars. So my title is Shofars. I've taken a little bit of leeway in how to interpret Shofars, and I came across a fascinating topic in the summer called the Great Shofar Controversy of 1881. That means in 1881, nearly 150 years ago, in Jerusalem, in Yerushalayim, there was a big debate regarding a shofar. And I'd like to share the whole topic with you. It's a fascinating topic. And it's not probably the typical share that you were expecting or you were looking for on shofar, so I apologize, but I think it's fascinating nonetheless. It combines history with lomdus, and certainly is very squarely related to Rosh Hashanah. So I hope you will engage and you will enjoy it. And feel free to interact and to ask me questions and to challenge, etc. Let me give you some background. This Shabbos in Mitzvah Hashem is Rosh Hashanah. If I were to play word association with you and to say Rosh Hashanah, what would you say? You would probably say apple, honey, and I think shofar would come up there pretty quickly on the list. And yet, even though it's a mitzvah aseh min haTorah to blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, this Shabbos we will not be blowing the shofar. Rosh Hashanah, we don't blow the shofar when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos. Why not? Where does this come from? So take a look at the first box on the handout. If you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com. I'll send you the handout. It says the mission in the first mission in the fourth parak of Rosh Hashanah. Yontav shel Rosh Hashanah, shechol yos b'Shabbos. When the first day of Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos, like it does this year, b'migdash hayu taikin. They would blow the shofar in the Migdash, aval lo b'Medina. Nowhere else in the Jewish world would they blow the shofar. They would only blow the shofar in the Beis HaMikdash. And therefore, today, you go to any shul throughout the world, this Shabbos, they're not going to be blowing the shofar. Mishechar of Beis HaMikdash, after the Churban, after the temple was destroyed, Hiskin Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, sheyutoikin b'chol makom sheyesh bo beis din. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made a takana. In fact, the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah says that he made several takanas. This is one of them. What was his takana? What was his institution, his enactment? Kol makom sheyesh bo beis din, wherever there is a beis din, they would blow the shofar. Omer Rabbi Elazar, a second opinion, Lo hiskin Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai ele b'Yavne bilvad. When it says Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made a takana that you blow the shofar, it was only in Yavne. What was Yavne? Yavne was the seat of the Sanhedrin. That's where the Sanhedrin, when it left Yerushalayim, it went to 10 places. One of the places was Yavne. Amrulai, they said back to Rabbi Elazar, Echad Yavne ve'echad kol makom sheyesh bebeis din. Whether it was Yavne or any place where there's a beis din, they would blow the shofar. Okay, now, the Gemara elaborates, elucidates the Mishnah. Take a look first in box number 3. It seems so far that we have 3 opinions. The first opinion is the Chachomim, the Tanna Kama, the first opinion. Kol makom sheyesh bebeis din. When Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai came along and said, wherever there is a beis din, you blow the shofar. Rabbi Elazar says no, only in Yavne. And then the third opinion is Echad Yavne ve'echad kol makom sheyesh bebeis din. So what exactly are they arguing about? Let's see. It says the Gemara in the next box, Omer Rabba, Midaraisa Mishra Shari. The truth is, from a Torah perspective, there is no problem to blow a shofar on Rosh Hashanah. What are you doing? What's the problem? It's not one of the 39 melachas to blow a shofar. It's chachma, it's not a melacha, the Gemara says. So min ha-Torah, there is no problem to blow a shofar. V'rabbanon hu degazur bei, but the Rabbanon, the rabbis made the decree, a gezerah, k'derabba, famous gezerah derabba. To Amar Rabba, what is this decree? Rabba says, hakol chayovim b'tkiya shofar, everyone is chayav to blow the shofar, ve'en hakol b'kiyin b'tkiya shofar. Everyone has got a chiyuv to hear the shofar, but not everyone is expert to blow the shofar. We're worried, says Rabbi, that a person who is going to blow the shofar for his community might needs a bit of training, last minute training, and therefore he'll go to an expert and he'll carry v'yavirenu arba amas b'shus harabim, and he'll carry the shofar daled amas in a rishus harabim. V'hainu time it's a lulav, v'hainu time it's a megillah, and in fact that is the same reason of lulav and his megillah. In other words, this Shabbos, although it's the first day of Rosh Hashanah, we will not be blowing the shofar. Why not? Gezeira derabba. What does that mean? That we're worried someone will go and learn, he'll go to an expert, and he'll learn how to blow the shofar, and he might carry daled amas, 4 amas in the Rishus Harabim. And in fact, this Shabbos, 2 weeks' time, amazingly, it's the first day of Sukkot. That's the mitzvah to shake the lulav. No one's going to be shaking the lulav again this year, the first day when it falls on Shabbos. Why not? Says the Gemara, a gezeira, it's a decree that maybe someone, somewhere, might carry the lulav. Now it seems a bit far off, right? It's a mitzvah in Torah to blow a shofar. It's a mitzvah in Torah to shake a lulav, and we're worried that someone somewhere may carry it to learn how to shake the lulav, to learn how to read the Megillah, to learn how to blow a shofar. That's the Gezeira Derabba. Yes?
Isn't it a bit late on the day that it's actually happening, the day that you need to blow the shofar, that's when you're learning? And wouldn't it make more sense that they would go
I guess the morning of Rosh Hashanah, when it falls on a Shabbos, he's getting last minute nerves, and on that morning, before he goes to shul, he's going to have a last minute lesson. He's practicing maybe, and therefore he goes to his Rabbi, or he goes to the expert to learn. You're right. In normal situations, he'll be well prepared and have training well in advance. But we're worried that on the morning of that he needs some last minute training. Yep. Okay. Now, continues the Gemara. Look at the next paragraph in box 3. Omer Rabbi Elazar, lo hiskin Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai le biyavne bavad. That's what the Rabbi Elazar says, and the response was Omru lo echad yavne ve'echad kol makom sheish bebeistin. So Omru lo hanu Tanakama. The Omru lo seems to be repeating what the Tanakama says. So have you got 2 opinions, 3 opinions? What's going on? Answers the Gemara, Ikka beinahu based in da'akroi, a temporary based in. In other words, that means that there are actually 3 opinions. The first opinion of the Chachomim is, what was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai Mesakim? What did he institute? According to the first opinion, that once there's a churban, any place where there is a beis din, you can blow the shofar, even a beis din akroi, even a temporary beis din. That means it's not a fixed beis din, the London beis din, the Manchester beis din, but rather it's a temporary beis din, like you do at Torah and Dorim. You get 3 rabbis together, or 3 men together, that's good enough. Then Rabbi Elazar says, no, it's got to be only Yavneh. Amrulai, they said no, echod yavne or echod kol beis din, but a beis din kavua. Okay, so that's the explanation of the Gemara. Now, one more caveat. Amrulai echod yavne, the last line of the Gemara. Echod yavne ve'echod kol makom sheish beis din. Rav Huna, when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said that you blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah in front of beis din, says Rav Huna ve'im beis din, with beis din. What does that mean? My ve'im beis din, says the Gemara, bifnei beis din, in front of the beis din, with the beis din. That's when you blow it. You blow it not just in a town where there is a beis din, but in front of the beis din. Okay, so just to summarize, what have we got? We've got a Mishnah which says that when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos, you don't blow the shofar. Why not? Explains the Gemara. Gezeira derabba, you might come to carry daled amas in the Rishus Harabim, 4 amas in the Rishus Harabim, which is an ism in Torah. According to the Chachomim, it seems that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, you are allowed to blow the shofar, any beis din, even a temporary beis din. Now, in 1881, a man, one of the Gedolim, one of the Torah greats, called Rabbi Kiva Yosef Schlesinger. He was a Talmid of the Ksaf Sofer, who was the son of the Chasam Sofer, and he came to Eretz Yisrael. He made Aliyah in 1870, and he researched this topic, and he felt that it was appropriate to reinstitute Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's takana, and to actually blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah when it falls on Shabbos. And he researched the topic, and he wrote a whole book. He wrote a whole sefer explaining why he felt it was appropriate, it was correct to blow the shofar on a Shabbos Rosh Hashanah. Now that caused, you can imagine, a lot of controversy. There were some people who sided with him, some people objected to what he said. That created a big tumult, a big discussion. Now, before we explain what his arguments were, let me just explain to you how the Rishonim understand the Mishnah we mentioned before. Three of the great Rishonim, Rashi, the Rambam, and the Rif, have a different take on what exactly Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was masaking. Let's think about this. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai came along and said, although when Yontif Shel Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos, you don't blow the shofar, he made an institution after the Churban that you blow the shofar in a beis din, where there is a beis din. The Gemara explains, in beis din means bifnei beis din. Now, what type of beis din does it need? That's going to be the big question. According to Rashi, Rashi says you need a beis din shel esrim v'shleisha, a beis din of 23, sometimes known as a Sanhedrin Katana, a small Sanhedrin. The large Sanhedrin with 71 dayanim, that's the massive Sanhedrin, which is in the Beis HaMikdash. Then the beis din Katana, beis din of 23, that's what you need. In other words, when can you blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, which falls on Shabbos, in front of a beis din, i.e. says Rashi, what criteria does this beis din have to have? It's got to be a Sanhedrin Katana, i.e. a beis din of 23. The Rambam says you have other criteria. What are the other criteria? Says the Rambam, you need smuchim. If you look at the box number 5.2, that means that the dayonim on that beis din have had smicha. What does smicha mean? Don't all rabbis have smicha? Isn't that what smicha is? No. Smicha here means something quite different. Smicha means that you became a rabbi because you got smicha, permission to paskin shaylos, etc., from a person who got smicha from a person who got smicha from a person, going all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. That chain is no longer existent, and therefore no one really has smicha in that understanding today. Says the Rambam, the beis din requirement is the dayanim have to have smicha. That means all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. And by the way, not for now, it's another topic, it's another very interesting topic. There have been movements over Jewish history to try and resurrect this, because the Rambam himself is of the opinion that there are certain conditions that you can have that would allow you to reinstitute this concept of smicha. And they tried to do it, and in fact, they tried in the times of Rabbi Yosef Cairo. The Rambam lived in the 12th century. But Rabbi Yosef Cairo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, lived in the 16th century, and there was a lot of movement at the time to resurrect this whole concept of smicha and having smuchim, and it didn't happen. There was resistance. There was a whole debate about it, and that is one of the reasons why Rabbi Yosef Cairo wrote the Shulchan Aruch. He says we haven't got a Sanhedrin who are going to decide halacha, yes, no, black, for the 16th century, for contemporary times and his times, and therefore I'm going to write a Shulchan Aruch, which is a book telling you the do's and the don'ts. So if you like, this whole smich controversy was one of the catalysts for the writing of the Shulchan Aruch. Amazingly, it actually has throwback to more recent times, by the way. Even in the 20th century, they tried to resurrect it, and there was a whole, the great synagogue in Jerusalem. That it's all part of this whole discussion, but that's not for now. So the Rambam says you need that criteria of smuchim. There is another criteria the Rambam says, and that is it's got to be a beis din shekitchu es hachodesh, a beis din that can sanctify the new moon. Now, according to Rashi, we haven't got a beis din Sanhedrin Katana. According to the Rambam, nowadays we don't have a smuchin, nor do we have a beis din mekadesh l'chodesh. So therefore, it's Rabbi Akiva Yosef Schlesinger is going to struggle a bit. The third opinion is the Rif. The Rif is the great Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi. He was one of the great Rishonim. In fact, the Shulchan Aruch writes in his Hakdama that the Shulchan Aruch is basically based on the opinion, the consensus of the three great Rishonim. Who are they? The Rambam, the Rif, and the Rosh. That's what he says. Just by the way, there is an inbuilt Sephardi majority, because the Rambam and the Rif, of course, is Sephardim. The Rosh is Ashkenazi. He was from Germany. He's the Talmud of the Maram Rottenberg. True, he escaped to Spain and he crossed paths with the Rashba and others, but the Rosh is one of the great, is one of the Ashkenazim. So therefore, that's why the Ramah, when he wrote his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, he had to redress the balance, because he had to take into consideration the Ashkenazi Rishonim, who the Beis Yosef had not really taken into consideration. Rashi, Tosfos, etc., etc. Just as an aside. Okay, what does the Rif say? The Rif says, Mishachar Beis Hamikdash, Omer Rafuna. Now again, what does the Rif do? If you're familiar with the Gemara, the beginning of the Gemara, it's big, thick writing with Rashi and Tosfos on either side, and it carries on until the end of the Gemara. Then you've got smaller writing. You've got the Rosh, and you've got the Marsha, and you've got other Mefarshim in the back of the Gemara. And then you keep going, and you suddenly it looks like another Gemara again. That's the Rif. What does the Rif do? He sucks out the halachic portions of the Gemara, and that is really the first codification of halacha. That's what the Rif did. But the Rif, importantly, only addresses halacha which applies nowadays. He doesn't talk about hilchas of the Mashiach, halachas which will apply after Mashiach comes. Now that is interesting, because the majority of people who write codifiers of halacha, they only talk about halacha nowadays. The Shulchan Aruch, the Torah, the Rosh, the Ramah, the Beis Yosef, that's what they all do. The one exception, of course, is the Rambam. The Rambam wrote on everything. You want to know about halachas of Torah Aduma? You want to know halachas about the Beis HaMikdash, Klei HaMikdash, etc., Tumah, Tahara, Karbonis? You look in the Rambam. That's where you find it. Now, the Rif only wrote about contemporary halacha. So therefore, when you look at the Rif in this Gemara in the beginning of the 4th parak of Rosh Hashanah, there's something very perplexing, because the Rif says, Mishecharav Beis HaMikdash, Omer Rav Huna v'im Beistin, Ma'im Beistin, B'fnei Beistin. Why is that perplexing? What should the Rif have said? Nothing. The Rif should have said nothing, because the Rif is only writing about halacha l'maisa. This is not halacha l'maisa, because we don't blow the shofar nowadays. There isn't the Elamai. The Rif clearly was of the opinion that it is relevant today. And therefore, the Balamar, he raises the question. The Balamar, a famous commentary on the Rif, says, "V'achshav ein lanu Sanhedrin lo gedola v'lo katana." Nowadays, we don't have a Sanhedrin, not a large one, not a small one, a 71 or 23 dayonim. V'ein shum mokem Yisrael shetokim bo b'yontav shel Rosh Hashanah. And therefore, there's no place anywhere in the Jewish world where you're going to blow shofar on the first day of Rosh Hashanah when it falls on a Shabbos. Lo hayot tzorech harav lichtov mikol zeh klum. Why is the Rif mentioning this? It's not relevant today. And this is one of the perplexing situations where the Rif brings a halacha which seemingly has no relevance today. Why is he bringing this? Now, look at the turn of the page. The Rosh, in the beginning of the 4th parak of Rosh Hashanah in Siman Aleph, says this. Omru alav al Rav Alfas. They say about Rav Alfas, of Yitzchak Alfasi, the Rif, shehoyotokeh b'Rosh Hashanah. That in fact, the Rif held that not only can you, but he did. The Rif in his Beis Din, he blew the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, which falls on a Shabbos. Astonishing. V'chein mashma behilchosov, says the Rosh, and that is implicit in his writing. What is that? Why is it mashma? Why is it implied from his writing? Because the Rif mentions it. If it wasn't relevant in practice today, he wouldn't mention it. The very fact that the Rif mentions it proves that the Rif felt it is relevant. And in fact, because he brings that. He only brings things which are relevant nowadays. Says the Rosh, you know why? Because the Rif was of the opinion that what type of Beis Din do we need? Not a Sanhedrin Katana, not a Sanhedrin Gedola even, but just a regular Beis Din, which is muflik, the best Beis Din in town. The best, the most impressive, prestigious Beis Din, however you want to describe that. And the Rif felt that his Beis Din was the most choshev Beis Din, and therefore he blew shofar in his time. However, interestingly, but his students didn't do that. Now, let's go back to the shofar controversy of 1881. Rabbi Yosef Schlesinger has recently arrived in Eretz Yisrael 11 years earlier. He wanted to reintroduce this takon of Reb Yochanan ben Zakkai. He wanted to blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, which falls on a Shabbos. So let's just analyze it from the information we have so far. He's going to struggle. It's going to be dead on arrival, because the Mishnah says you can blow the shofar. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was masakin, you blow the shofar, but what type of Beis Din do you need? According to Rashi, you need a Beis Din, a Sanhedrin Katana of 23. You haven't got that. According to the Rif, you need Smuchin, and you need a Beis Din who Mekadesh on the Chodesh. You haven't got that. He's going to be Somech on the Rif, the one opinion which explains it, and that's indeed what the Rif did. The difficulty is, it's one opinion out of 3, and more, Even the students of the Rif didn't continue his practice. So therefore, what are the arguments of Rabbi Akiva Yosef Schlesinger to reintroduce the blowing of the shofar on the first day of Rosh Hashanah when it falls on a Shabbos? So, like I said, he wrote a whole sefer arguing his case. One of the giants of Yerushalayim in the early 1900s was someone called Rabbi Chil Michal Tukachinsky, famous personality in Jewish history of the first half of the 20th century. He wrote a famous sefer called Ir HaKodesh VaMikdash, and he's dedicated in Chelik Gimel Perek Chaf one whole chapter to this whole discussion. He takes Rabbi Akiva Yosef Schlesinger's book, and he basically says there are 13 arguments that he presents. Now, there isn't time to go through all 13, but I'll share some of them with you. He basically goes through and extracts 13 arguments and then dismisses each one. But let's look at some of the arguments. It's fascinating. Let's look at some of the arguments that Rabbi Akiva Yosef Schlesinger presents as presented by Rabbi Chil Michal Tukachinsky. Okay, so look at box number 6. Number 1. Halacha da'asei deraisa docha issa medivrei sofrim. How fascinating. You've got an issa deraisa. That means there is a biblical prohibition to do something. An asay deraisa. There is a mitzvah of an asay deraisa that can be pushed aside. That pushes aside an issa midivrei sofrim. He gives an example. Tsar balei chayim. You're not allowed to cause any distress to an animal. Wanton distress, unnecessary distress to an animal. Tsar balei chayim is deraisa. That is docher and issa drabonon. For example, you've got an animal in distress, so you need to be over on Shabbos. There's a problem of muktzah, of whatever the situation may be. The tsar balei chayim deraisa, the asay of that, is docher the issa drabonon of bottle levatel kli meichono, muktzah, etc. So therefore, says Rabbi Akiva Yosef Schlesinger, the asay of blowing the shofar on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, which is a mitzvah deraisa, should surely overpower the mitzvahs, the gezerah drabonon of Shemi Yavren, Dal Damas. That's one argument. Another argument. Look at this is his fourth argument. The next where it says Dalit. Raya mimashikosav haran l'taretz hakusha shehuk shegam b'taisus. Listen to this. The Rishonim, Taisus, the Ran all ask the following question: Maishno lulav she'acha achur b'neinitl klal b'Shabbos u'maishno shofar she'tiknu. They ask a great question. How come Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted that you blow the shofar on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, which falls on a Shabbos? Why didn't he institute the same thing with lulav? Why didn't he say that in the Mikdash or in front of Beis Din you shake a lulav? Why is it dafka shofar? That's all the Rishonim ask this question. The Tiritz, and they answer, Shani lulav. I'll tell you why. Lulav is different. Sheyiskayim b'shah yomi v'lo nekra ha-mitzvah. So you won't shake the lulav on the first day. So you'll shake it on the all other 7 days of Sukkot. Masha'en kein b'shofar, in contrast with shofar, because in the Mikdash itself, there's only 1 day of Rosh Hashanah. So if you don't do it today, that's it. Otherwise, you've uprooted the mitzvah totally. It's another answer is, do we know the power of a shofar? Allah Elokim Bisrua. Midas Hadin goes up, Midas Chesed comes down. The Zichronus go lifnai v'lifnim, and therefore le'rotz levatel legamrei, etc., etc. That's another argument he presents. Another one, Vov. Ubishvil kach harav hahu lechadesh. This Rabbi Akiva Yosef Schlesinger presents a very interesting argument. We said that who's he somech on? Rashi, no. The Rambam, no. The Rif, maybe. He says even the Rambam would agree with me. The Rambam says you need smuchim. The Rambam says you need the based in the Mekadesh the Chodesh. Look what he says. Shegam HaRambam ina choylek al Rif. He's not arguing with the Rif. V'gam hu moedesh b'chol based in muflig v'kovea after somach teikin. He would agree that even at the end of the day, you haven't got smuchim and you haven't got a based in which Mekadesh al pi hariyah. They can still do it. Why the Rambam says you need smuchim? No, the Rambam says that's only ideally. that you try and get the best based in possible. Who are the best based in? The best based in are smuchin, link after link, chain after chain, down from Moshe Rabbeinu. Like the Gemara says, klach etzel based in Yofa, go to the best based in. And therefore, you choose the best possible based in, and at the time, the Beis HaMikdash, that was a based in who are Mekadesh al Pi based in. But once you no longer have that, if they are based in Agod, the main based in Mekudesh HaChodesh, ain't taken in for a based in Somach, then you go after a based in which are Smuchin, which are down all the way down from Moshe Rabbeinu. The Imgam ain't based in Somach, and if you haven't got Smuchin, Toikim b'fnei Stam based in, then you can do it in front of any based in. וזה ששים הרמב"ם, שאפילו בזמן הזה, הם לא יסמוק מהרוי לזכויה, רוצלם אפילו סתם בייסטין, מפוקש הזמן, you just choose off the best basting that you've got. So even the Rambam would agree with me, says Rabbi Akiva Yosef Schlesinger, he would agree with the Rif that you should still do it nowadays. Another argument, Oid Neifach Gadol Meisif, that the Gezerah was only in a time when there was a Rishus Harabim Deraisa, and therefore carrying Daladamas, you're going to be over a Deraisa. We, however, pass that, and that's the Rambam Neshitosai. However, we pass like others, that nowadays there is no Rishus Harabim, and therefore there is less of a concern of a Gezerah Shemi Yavirenu. Furthermore, says Rabbi Akiva Yosef Schlesinger in paragraph Yud, he says, you know what? You need a basin of 23, according to Rashi, I'll get 23 people in the room. I'll get me and 22 others, we'll be okay. So you'll have your Sanhedrin Katana. And lastly, he says something very interesting. Yud Gimel. Again, I'm just picking out some of the arguments he uses. Listen to this. If you hear that you're in Yerushalayim, for example, Rosh Hashanah, and you hear, this is going back to 1881, that the great Rabbi Akiva Yosef Schlesinger feels very strongly that it's right to resurrect this takana, and that you should blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, which falls on Shabbos, in front of a Beis Din, who is in violation of this takana? The guy blowing the shofar. But if you're just the listener, no problem. Go listen. What's the concern? The guy blowing it, that's his problem. They're listening to the shofar, they're fulfilling the mitzvah deraisa. Etc. Because the Gemara says that Rabbi Eliezer had an eved, and he was meshachre the eved, which is an issa deraisa. You can't just free the slave. He did it in order to get a minyan. And that minyan is a mitzvah derabim. Afshe mitzvah drabonon, a minyan itself is actually a mitzvah drabonon. The Gemara in Brachas Mem Zayin. Kal v'choy melav al drabonon k'tei l'kayim mitzvah derabim shel Torah. Certainly you can violate the drabonon to be mekayim the mitzvah deraisa. V'yodua ma she'omru nichelei lechaver lemevid isaklila v'lo lemevid amaretz isarabo. You know what? Sometimes the Gemara says that a Talmid Chacham can do a small aveira to prevent somebody else doing a bigger aveira. You got to take one for the team. Take it on the chin for the team. The Maskonos Taisus there is, well, so long as that person wasn't Pesheya, then you say, so these are half a dozen or so of the rationalizations, the arguments of Rabbi Akiva Yosef Schlesinger to explain why he felt. But each one was dismissed out of hand by Rabbi Chil Michal Tukuchinsky. Years later, the Rav of Yerushalayim was someone called Tzvi Pesach Frank. Famous Rav. His great-grandchildren are in school in Hasmoniyah. His Tzvi Pesach Frank raises a couple of more very interesting points. I mentioned to you, let's say you find yourself in Yerushalayim in 1881, and you should know there have been attempts to resurrect it in more recent times. And I said to you just now that you're going to go along and listen to it. Have you fulfilled the mitzvah deraisa of Tkiyah Shofar, of listening to the shofar? The Chorah. Says Rabbi Tzvi Pesach Frank, really? Two arguments. Number one, if Chazal say you don't blow the shofar when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos, then Shabbos is not a zman for shofar. So therefore, there is no mitzvah to perform. Number one. Number two, there's no chiyuv to blow shofar because Chazal say you don't blow shofar when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos. If the Baal Tokeh, the guy blowing the shofar, is not mechuyev, then he can't fulfill your obligation. And therefore, he can't be made to you. Only someone who is a bar chiyuv, for example. You have a cheresh shoto a cotton. You've got a kid who's 7 years old, who's a fabulous bal tokeya, but he's not mechuyev. So if he's not mechuyev, you can't get him standing up in shul blowing shofar for everyone, because only someone who is mechuyev can be motzi other people. So therefore, if there's no chiyuv in the first place, you going along in 1881 to hear it, you're not going to perform the mitzvah. Is that true? Now this is not time, but this is a big discussion, because at the end of the day, min ha-Torah, is there a mitzvah to listen to the shofar this Shabbos? Yes. It's just that the Rabbanim came along and said, Shev al Taisa, we're worried because of certain concerns. Now, says Rabbi Pesach Frank, I'll prove to you that must be correct. That there is still a mitzvah. Why? Listen to this clever proof. Fast forward this Shabbos 2 weeks' time. Shabbos 2 weeks' time is the first day of Sukkot. The first day of Sukkot falls on the Shabbos, we don't shake lulav. Someone forgets. In his excitement to do the mitzvah, he spent ages, days and days choosing a nice lulav and esrog. He comes to shul with his beautiful lulav. It's quite embarrassing. He's walking around. I know someone who did this. I know someone who he got confused. He was in a place where there's an Erev and he thought that you can do it. And B'kitzur, there's low plug. We don't shake lulav on the first day of Sukkot. You come to shul, you look around. How come everyone's forgotten their lulav and esrog? And then you realize, it's like the joke. The wife calls the husband and says, darling, I just heard on the radio that there's a crazy guy, a lunatic, who's driving down the wrong way on the M1, going the opposite way. He says, darling, what are you talking about? One? There are hundreds of them. Right? So you go to the shul and you're shaking your lulav, you look around, there's no one there, there's no one else bringing it, and you bring yours. Okay, you go along and you shake and you do the Rebbeinu Shalom beforehand, and you make the brachas and you make shechionu, and then someone tells you, actually, there's no lulav today. It's Shabbos. You don't shake lulav when the first time Sukkot falls on a Shabbos, or any day when on Shabbos during Sukkot. Sunday, the next day, he comes back to shul a bit sheepish with his lulav and esrog. Does he make a shechionu? He made it yesterday. But did yesterday count? Says Rabbi Akiva Eiger, he doesn't make a shechion. You see that min ha-Torah, he has performed a mitzvah. The rabbi said, don't do it, shev al taisa, but if he went and did it, he's performed a mitzvah. And therefore, min ha-Torah, there's still a mitzvah, and therefore there's a proof from Rabbi Akiva Eiger that he still performed his mitzvah. Okay. Ad kan all the lomdas. You want to know what actually happened. Did they blow the shofar in 1881 or not? So what happened was, and they came out with all other terutzim as well. The Rambam says that even though the takana was you don't blow shofar when a Rosh Hashanah falls on a Shabbos, but eis tzara, in a time of difficulty, of distress, you can blow shofar because you blow shofar in a time of tzara. So says Rabbi Akiva Yosef, I'll throw in another thing. We'll all have in mind to blow shofar, there's an eis tzara now, it's always an eis tzara, there's always troubles. But at the end of the day, the Rabbanan said you shouldn't do it. And therefore, he couldn't get together 23 people, and it never happened. They did not blow the shofar. But there's a very interesting postscript to the story. Rabbi Eliyahu Mordechai Eisenstein was a grandson-in-law of Rabbi Shmuel Salant. Rabbi Shmuel Salant was the great Rav of Yerushalayim for a long time. If I'm not mistaken, he was the Rav of Yerushalayim for 70 years. Can you imagine? He was a young man when he became a Rav. If I'm not mistaken, he turned 85 or so. He was getting older, and he didn't feel that he could fully have all the responsibility of being the Rav in Yerushalayim. So they called over the Aderes. He wrote to the Aderes to say to him, "I'd like you to take over from me." The Aderes is one of the great personalities again of Jewish history. Eliyahu David Rabinowitz Tumim, Rosh Tevis Aderes, and he came over. There's a fascinating postscript that there's a letter that he wrote to his son-in-law. Who was the Aderes' son-in-law? The Aderes' son-in-law was Rav Kook. So he wrote to his son-in-law and he said, I want to tell you something. He said, Rav Shmuel Salant has asked me to become the Rav in Yerushalayim. But I'm worried about it. Because what's going to happen? I'm going to come to Yerushalayim and they say Shema. Who do they wait for? They wait for the Rav. And they're going to wait for me. And Rav Shmuel Salant has been the Rav here for decades. And Rav Shmuel Salant, in his tremendous sidkus and modesty, is going to insist that they wait for me, the new Rav in Yerushalayim. And who's going to be Masada Kiddushin? And who's going to they're going to wait for the end of Shemona Esra and all the other rabbinic functions? There's going to be, he's a human being, there's going to be although he's a big tzaddik, there's going to be a 0.1% twinge of, You do that to a tzaddik, that's bad news. Okay, it could be a kitrug in Shemaim against me, but nevertheless, he writes to his son Rav Kook, my love for Eretz Yisrael is so strong, I'm coming anyway. And amazingly, Rav Shmuel Salant outlived him. Even though he was many years junior to him, he died in his 60s, and Rav Shmuel Salant continued to be the Rav in Yerushalayim after the death of the Aderes. That's an interesting postscript. Now, another postscript to the story. Rabbi Yoel Mordechai Eisenstein quoted Rav Shmuel Salant and said the following. In 1904, Rabbi Yechiel Michal Tukachinsky, who was the Rav in Yerushalayim, and he was famous for writing his luach, all the zmanim, this famous luach, the Rabbi Yechiel Michal Tukachinsky. When you write the luach and you put all the zmanim and you write everything related to it, he takes it to the Rav in Yerushalayim, who was the Aderes at the time, like I mentioned. Look at the bottom box. V'shomaiti mi'arav Yoel Mordechai Eisenstein. Sofer v'ne'eman, he was a sofer and is a very trustworthy person. Morad Asra, Moreinu harav hagon of Shmuel Salant Zatzal. He was a grandson-in-law of Rav Shmuel Salant, the Rav of Yerushalayim. Ki av omnan ha'hai eina moira lahalocha l'tkoya. That Rav Shmuel Salant told him that even though halacha l'maisa you don't blow the shofar, if anyone would have come to him and said, should I go and listen to the shofar blowing, I would have told him don't go. But if the guy says, I'm keen to go, I'm going to go anyway, I'm not going to stop him. Says Rabbi Yechiel Michal Tukachinsky, I'm distressed. I had the opportunity. I knew Rabbi Shmuel Salant, but I never discussed this with him. Chaval. But his grandson-in-law, Rabbi Yoel Mordechai Eisenstein, I believe what he told me about the position that Rabbi Shmuel Salant took about it. Next postscript. In the summer of Tofresh Samach Dalet, which is 1904, when I wrote the next year's Luach, this book that I write every year, and I took it to Hagon, Rabbi Yoel David Rabinus Tumim, the Aderes, that's all. He looked through the Luach, I was sitting there with him. You can picture the scene in Old Jerusalem. The Rabbi Yechiel Michal Tukachinsky showing his Luach to the Aderes, who was an old man by then, he was a senior man, the Ne'enach, and he groaned. What a shame that the coming Rosh Hashanah, which is Tofresh Samach, which is 1905, Chal b'Shabbos, it falls on a Shabbos. What a shame. Umi Yodea, said the Aderes, who knows, im ezke oid lishma kol shofar deraisa, if I'm going to ever hear the Tekiah Shofar again from the Torah. On day 2 it's Drabonim. He felt that he was quite unwell medically. Which means that he's not going to be around next year. And in fact, he wasn't around, because he died on Gimel Adar, Tofresh Samach, he died Purim time in 1905. And then he added the following. Ilu hoya harav Rabbi Kiva Yosef oise ma'aseh b'Rosh Hashanah haba l'tkoya b'Shabbos. If Rabbi Kiva Yosef Schlesinger, who was still alive by the way, he died in 1920 or 21, around then. If he would do his thing and blow the shofar on Shabbos Rosh Hashanah, says the Aderes, I would go and stand and listen to that Tekiah Shofar behind the wall. I'd go stand l'shmoa kol shofar, to hear the kol shofar. Fascinating. So, in summary, what have we? Yes. So that is a big debate. There was 3 Pesach frank heads. There is arguments both ways. This is lomdas. You can argue both ways. This is not halacha l'maisa. Halacha l'maisa, we don't blow shofar on Shabbos Rosh Hashanah. But there are arguments both ways. On one hand, you could say, Chazal say don't blow. Shabbos is not as one for shofar. The guy's not mechuyev, and if he's not mechuyev, he's not going to be moed to you. Therefore, no. On the other hand, in Torah you are. Proof from Rabbi Akiva. So that is part of the whole debate.
But if they're anyway doing it...
If they're anyway, yeah. But you could argue again both ways. If they're anyway doing it, but there's not as man for shofar, and therefore he's not mechuyev to do it. If he's not mechuyev, he can't be moisi. On the other hand, Rabbi Akiva, etc., etc. What have we got? Yeah.
He's blowing the shofar. The mitzvah is to hear the shofar. So how can he be moisi someone?
But the guy blowing the shofar has also got a chiyuv to hear the shofar, and he's hearing what he's blowing.
Oh,
Right? So he is being moitzi others, and he's also being moitzi himself, and he has that kavanah. The question is, if there's no zman shofar, is he still has the ability to be moitzi other people? Okay, let me just summarize. I know this is a little bit different to what you're used to, but it's super geschmack. What have we said? This year, the first day of Rosh Hashanah falls on a Shabbos. The first Mishnah in the fourth parak of Rosh Hashanah says that Yom Tov Shel Rosh Hashanah Shechol Yos B'Shabbos, B'Migdash HaYotokim, but the B'Medina not. The rest of the world, you don't blow the shofar. And that is what's going to happen throughout the Jewish world this Shabbos. However, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai came along and was misakein that we blow a shofar in front of Beis Din, as the Gemara says, Bifnei Beis Din. What type of Beis Din? Three-way machlokas, Rashi, Rambam, Rif. Rashi says a Beis Din of 23. The Rambam says Smuchin plus possibly Sheikatris, Shekitza HaChodesh. They've got the ability to make Kaddish HaChodesh. And the Rif says seemingly no criteria. And therefore, Rabbi Akiva Yosef Schlesinger came along and wanted to reinstitute this whole takana. Let's do it. Who's he going to rely on? Rashi, the Rambam, it seems to be difficult to rely on then. With all the arguments that I presented, 6 plus there are several more, he tried to argue and reinstitute it. It didn't work. It didn't work. It was rejected. However, it was rejected somewhat reluctantly. Because whilst they paskin not, if someone would go, he wouldn't protest against it. Let me just tell you a couple of postscripts I think I can take home from this, which I think is a nice musa segue into Rosh Hashanah. This time next week it's Kimat over. What did you see from here? What was driving Rabbi Akiva Yosef Schlesinger? What was driving him? What was the coffee talk at the time in Jerusalem in 1881? That's why it's amazing when you research these sugyas. You want to know what they were talking about in the streets at the time in Jerusalem in 1881. This is what they were talking about. But what was driving Rabbi Akiva Yosef Schlesinger? What was driving him was this burning desire to keep mitzvahs. I've got a mitzvah deraisa of Tkiyah Shofar. I've got a way, I think we can actually do it. A halachically valid way, which he argues, and he wrote a whole sefer on it. I think a useful take-home from all of this, aside from the Geschmack Lomdus of it, is a burning desire we should have to keep Torah and mitzvahs. Now, Tkiyah Shofar is a mitzvah deraisa. There's lots of other mitzvah deraisas we get the opportunity to do the whole time. I'll give you one example. Something which it's so common that we don't always do it. Birchas Hamazon, benching. You sit down, you wash, you have some bread, and yachalta, savata, you ate, you're full. There is a mitzvah veirachta. A mitzvah to bench is a mitzvah in Torah. That's massive. A mitzvah in Torah, that's massive. Rebbetzin Roberts, Alea Shalom, the wife of Rav Pinchas Roberts, she made a point of eating bread 3 times a day. A slice of bread for breakfast, for lunch, and supper. Why? Because I've got the opportunity to Mekayim Mitzvah Deraisa of Birchas Hamazon. Is that not astonishing? They say Rabbi Yashiv's daughter, Chaim Kanievsky's wife, she made a point of washing and of benching every single day. Why? This is going back, the travel in those days and from Bnei Brak to Yerushalayim was a bit difficult. She couldn't actively be mechabed kibbud aveim in the way that she wanted to. So she said, let me at least eat some bread, say Birchas Hamazon, and I will say, Haracham Yivarech es Avi Meri v'Simi Mirasi, at least I'll give them a blessing. Chazal mandated this bracha. People think differently. I don't know about you, but what's going through my mind is, what shall I have for lunch? Something to aspire to, this tshuka for mitzvahs, and certainly Tkiyah Shofar. Mitzvah Hashem, we should be zocher to have a ksiva v'chasima Torah.